Perfect. Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome so much to the release of the World Commerce and Contracting and Contract Pod AI, the 10 Pitfalls of Contracting report. We are so excited today to have both Tim Cummings, who is the president of World Commerce and Contracting, as well as Anurag Malak, who's CTO at Contract Pod AI, here to discuss the reports in more details. Before we do, just two quick housekeeping items I wanted to mention. Firstly, we want the webinar to be as interactive as possible. So please add your questions to the Q&A section. There's also chat, so please add any comments or questions that you have in there as well. And both Tim and Anurag will respond to those throughout the webinar. Secondly, we will be sending out an email later today with both the recording that we are taking of the webinar right now, as well as your copy of the report into the email that you use to register for the webinar. So please keep an eye out for that. And now, without further ado, I am going to give over to Tim to kick us off.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Welcome everyone to the program today. And it has been a fascinating exercise, in fact, reflecting on the 10 pitfalls. And probably many of our audience are familiar with the history of the 10 pitfalls, but we will touch on those a little more. And of course, our session today is going to take us through a detailed look at the 10 pitfalls and how the field, the world of artificial intelligence is perhaps bringing change to the way that we can manage them, perhaps even eliminate many of them. So, questions that people, of course, have faced for many years has been this question of actually, what is the impact of contracts? How much do they actually matter? And of course, you'll find many people in many organizations who tend to view contracts purely as this administrative requirement that, well, it's there to protect us in the event of litigation or dispute, but otherwise, by and large, it's not relevant. Well, I think the work on the 10 pitfalls absolutely just proved that point, because actually contracts do have a major impact on operational efficiency and effectiveness. They have a major impact on behaviors, the way we negotiate contracts, the way we manage and implement them, etc. So back in 2013, 2014, we first really tried to dig into what actually is the value leakage, and then from there we began to look at questions of why, what causes it to happen, and that gave birth to the 10 pitfalls that emerged from a series of surveys, roundtables, and I have to acknowledge, essentially it was crowdsourced. Now that's not going to surprise you, Anurag, because certainly back 2013, 2014, very few people had technology that could really give them any insight to the leakage of value, could they?
Actually, the tools were available, but as you know, legal tech is a little behind enterprise technology, and enterprise technology as such is behind typical B2C, right? And legal tech was just coming up, right? In 2013, 14, I think you would see the first few companies come out. But again, legal departments, even to this day, don't have the kind of budgets to actually go and buy their own products or software. So pretty much, I would say very few, if any, were using software and technology to analyze contracts and to see their contracting inventory. And maybe there were some in-house products, right, to get contracts in one place to maintain a repository, but that too, that's something which wasn't very common either. Contracts used to be all over the place. And Tim, just to echo your point on our contract, just administrative tools. In fact, on the contrary, I think, and I not just think, it is a fact that an enterprise's value lies in the contracts, right? It is what revenue you're generating and what expenses you're going to have is distributed all across the contracts you have. So it is essentially the most important thing. And more organizations are realizing that now. Very different world from when we were in 2013-14.
Yeah, so the real key here, I think, you're right. I mean, obviously, we know that a business is probably very difficult to sell, to realize value from it if you don't have any contracts. So we know that they drive a lot of the economics of the business world in theory, but of course, they're cumbersome instruments, they're complicated instruments, they're complicated to assemble, they're complicated to understand. So you can understand why people push them away and say, yeah, that's all great, but I just get on. I manage my relationships. I don't manage my contracts. And what we're talking about, I think, and what we're going to be illustrating today, what this report is about, is we believe the time for fundamental change has come. That the opportunity to rethink and use contracts much more as opportunities to generate revenue, cost reduction, etc., in a much more proactive way has at last arrived. So, quick answer to the questions are: number one, yes. How much? I can't tell you, but certainly through our contract economics work and the workshops we're running there, we've got some pretty good estimates, and we certainly will shortly be releasing actually a sort of health check tool to help you look in a simple way at the likely level of leakage based on the nature of the industry you're in, the type of contracts you engage into, and of course the competence you've got in managing them. So number one, yes, but a variable amount. And that obviously is specific to particular businesses. Second, we're going to talk about how you can identify. And third, we're also going to talk about what you can do to prevent them. So number 2 and 3, certainly by the end of this session, we hope you'll be walking away with some convincing answers. So let's get to the meat of what we're talking about. Pitfall number 1. So a favorite for many of us, I'm sure, lack of clarity on the scope and goals. And well, if we don't really have clarity, there are a whole series of byproducts for this. Some of them cause immediate cost. So for example, they generate the need often for rework. You know, when it arrives in the commercial team or the legal team and they look and they say, I can't understand what this is about, or, you know, we haven't aligned properly, do we really understand requirements, etc. This is one of the most frequent, most common, and of course, generates not only front-end cost, but importantly, a whole load of cost in the post-award environment, doesn't it, Anurag?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, one of the biggest reasons I've seen in this is not involving the right stakeholders, right? And there are products out there, workflow automation products, which can easily build intelligent workflow systems for you, where you get the right stakeholders involved based on what the requirements are. But also, why look at every contract differently, right? And organizations always do similar kind of projects over and over again, and there's intelligence in work that has been done in the past and contracts that have been signed, or there are things you don't want to repeat again in contracts that were signed before. And that's the kind of intelligence that AI can help pull out of your own inventory of contracts to make future contracts simpler, more clear, right? The goal, Tim, is, yes, contracts are complicated, but our goal is to simplify them so that more and more of the stakeholders can understand the objectives really they need from it, and what the ultimate goal is, right? So simplification, looking at your past, both successes and failures, that's where data mining, AI can come in and make things simpler for you.
Mm. Yes, I mean, AI really is providing, the report itself, of course, goes into much more depth than these couple of sentences on the right-hand side. But the opportunity to look at precedent, the opportunity to learn from past experience and avoid the pitfalls that have occurred in the past. This particular one certainly relates to the forward look that says, actually, if I look at the multiple disagreements that have occurred in issues around the scope and goals in post-award, what can I learn from that? If 35%, which is often not uncommon, end in some level of disagreement, not a dispute, but a disagreement where perhaps one or other party has to give ground, where there's a debate over whether something's chargeable or non-chargeable. If you look at those experiences, you can begin to do analytics on them, and AI can really help you to do that analysis, and of course reverse engineer what you find to avoid that problem in future.
Yeah.
But it's also much more effective at making sure that it can be parallel review, that things are routed to the appropriate set of stakeholders at the right moment in time. So, you're getting your commercial review occurring at the same time as the technical review is occurring, for example. We're also seeing AI increasingly helping teams to understand what is the best pricing or charging model for this particular scope of work, for instance? Is it a fixed price or is it in fact an agile agreement? Where are we on a spectrum? So this ability to project intelligence out into the business across stakeholders is really powerful, Aaron.
Absolutely it is. And you know what, there's a lot of products out there. I think somebody asked this question too. Absolutely, there are a lot of products out there, and they all have the strengths and weaknesses, and it becomes overwhelming. Which one's the right one for me? My advice would be to go out there, look at some key analyst reports, so that you can narrow your search from 200 contract management companies to probably 10 or 15, and then get demos, see if it solves your use cases. I think that's the way to go.
So, well, this one is certainly one of my favorites because I think it's in many organizations, depending on the nature of their business, but for many organizations, particularly dealing with more complex forms of contract, this pitfall number one is probably the most significant in terms of the leakage that occurs. So let's look at number two. What does that lead us towards? Well, it's sort of obviously a flow through from the first one. Not involved early enough is a frequent challenge, isn't it?
It is. So many times, because there are no processes and or systems in place in an organization, contracts, legal teams, by the time they get in, the technology or the business teams are ready to sign a contract, right? They've already lost the crucial time when it comes to negotiation, looking at fine print, looking at the right clauses, and legal teams are generally understaffed and under pressure to get things moving. What systems can do is flip it on its head, right? As soon as there is a request or a requirement, legal teams would get involved in parallel, just like Tim said, right? You do not have to do things serially. While you are going through product features and other things or in demos to identify a product you want to purchase as a business team, the legal team could actually start negotiating on key terms, not even non-financial terms, which are key. And I think the pandemic has shown us that there are so many things which we haven't thought about before, which are now crucial. And you know what? There are tools which can tell you, hey, if these are the set of clauses that are important to you as an organization, show it an incoming contract, and AI will tell you what's missing or what's not aligned to the kind of language you prefer. So really involving legal teams in parallel is the way to go. And systems only help you do that. And in an effective way, right? You're not just sending an email to your legal support that, hey guys, I'm looking at this product. Here's the first draft of the contract. Because yeah, that gets them started, but is it making them more efficient? No.
Yeah, well, I get excited by perhaps being a bit more revolutionary than that, Anurag. I mean, to me, the perfect environment is where I just don't need to involve the physical legal team because my virtual lawyer is there. So a lot of the stuff that we're reviewing is repetitive. It's looking at it just in case, or it's looking at exactly the same scenario 50, 100, 200 times, spread around the business, different lawyers, different contracts teams, actually dealing with much the same topic repetitively. What a waste of time that is. And of course, that's where a lot of the executive frustration comes from about the delays that are created. So AI is beginning to give us the self-service that we actually expect as consumers. I mean, these days we expect to be able to go onto our phone and find the information we need to guide ourselves through our life. We don't expect to have to call an expert every time. And, you know, business is very much the same now, isn't it? Where we can begin to take many of those relatively predictable, familiar and frequent situations and actually move it out to the front end. And of course, at an extreme, we are seeing examples of companies that are moving the decision-making around what do I want in my contract right out into the customer or the supplier's office. Here are your options. So, you know, we really can begin to streamline a lot of these processes and eliminate a lot of this physical review that we undertake today.
Yeah, and AI is not replacing lawyers in any way. I think it's doing the mundane tasks so that the lawyers can actually focus on the strategic work. And really, that's what it is. If there's a repeated task you have to do over and over again, you know, just the whole concept of robots too, right? If there's something boring, repetitive, you got to automate it, right? So you can really focus on strategic work.
And of course, I must emphasize here that the report, when you get to read it, will contain a lot of examples, detail, the things that we're discussing here. This is not pure speculation. This is not, oh, well, this might happen one day. What the report contains are examples drawn from a whole host of interviews with different organizations, public and private sector. Actually, what are going on in the public sector these days around digitization and the introduction of AI. And so when you read it, you know, you will be discovering stuff that people are actually doing. This is not theory. Let's get to number 3. Well, why do we want to engage stakeholders? They just cause delay, create problems. You know, we've learned a lot about the challenges of contracting really in the pandemic, haven't we? And I mean, we were chatting before we began about the fact that probably one of the biggest things we've learned from the pandemic is the frailty of human beings in trying to forecast what's going to happen. You know, we look at the supply chain crisis that we're facing, and much of it is, of course, self-induced because of people cutting back on stock, cutting back on storage facilities, cutting costs in all sorts of directions because they thought that we were going to face this plummet in demand. And suddenly, whoops, no, actually we're not. So we suddenly haven't got the facilities, we haven't got the stock, we haven't got the capability of logistics, etc. So this issue of engaging stakeholders is a fascinating one because there's no question that, you know, a contract, and part of the complexity of a contract is the variety of people who have a legitimate interest in it. We actually ignore a lot of stakeholders today, of course. You know, our recent benchmark report generated the insight that in the average organization, about 25% of the workforce have some involvement in contracting and contract management. You know, that could be accounts payable, accounts receivable, it could be project management. It may be somebody out in one of the factories who needs data to know what's the delivery date, how many do they want, and what color is it meant to be. But contracts are not, and the contracting process is not today efficient at engaging and passing data and information to stakeholders and gathering it from stakeholders. That's where so much goes wrong today, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. You know, the problem is complex, right? Making sure the right stakeholders are involved, but it can be solved using both automation and AI. And I know I'm obsessed with those two words, but really, if you build in workflows which, based on certain conditions, will assign or notify the right stakeholders, whether it's in your IT department for security, or whether it's in the finance department for other approvals and other risk, and your risk department, right? And how can we all forget risk management in today's world, where honestly, I think every organization out there has been affected by broken supply chains, where there was too much reliance on one single suppliers. Right? There were no backup plans or backup contracts built up, and for that matter, to keep the supply chain intact, right? So I think involving stakeholders, depending on the size and other attributes of the contract, can be defined enterprise-wide and applied to every incoming contract, whether it's a third party or your own paper. And that goes a long way. I mean, there's so much here, which involving the right stakeholder. Involving the right stakeholder, as you think, might be easy, right? I mean, I think I need to make sure IT and risk are a part of every contract. But that's the simplest definition of it, right? I mean, involving them based on some intelligent thought process, especially after what we all have learned from in the last 2 years, goes a long way. And yes, there's enough intelligence in most organizations, if I may say so, when it comes to their existing contracts to learn from that.
I love intelligent broad libraries. That's one of the things that excites me. You know, templates are a relatively recent phenomenon, actually, in many businesses. And certainly when I started my career, it was what, a few years ago now, we didn't have templates. In fact, when I started in the automotive sector, we didn't even have contracts, but that's a different story. The templates were obviously very much designed to try and drive efficiency, to address this point of not having to look at every deal every time and create custom agreements. And they did serve their purpose. But the problem with templates is, of course, the rigidity they introduce, the fact that, as one of our members said the other day, you know, the average template is the graveyard of past mistakes. Lovely thought. And what we've seen is contracts multiplied like Topsy. You know, what used to be perhaps 2-page agreements nowadays can be 20 or 30 or 40-page agreements as we stuff in every new regulation and this and that and the other. Much of it potentially inapplicable to a specific situation or particular customer or supplier we're dealing with. So there's a lot of redundancy, which then, of course, is one of the big causes of a lot of negotiation, because people say, oh, I'm not happy with this thing here because it doesn't apply to what we're doing. Well, no, so don't worry about it. Yeah, but I do worry about it because it may come to apply later on. And equally, you know, we really struggle, I think, with a proactive updating process. And of course, this again is where AI can help us, because as we talk about when we look at negotiation and things, it's capturing experience. So if we're in fact negotiating the same clause 65% of the time, well, maybe it's time to relook at the clause.
Exactly.
So let's move to that issue of protracted negotiations, because this is another big one, isn't it? It's the frustration of many executives that Why does it take so long? Why? If I'm in the sales team, the issue of trying to get the contract put in place makes forecasting often impossible to achieve. And, we are seeing organizations, again, who through their more effective use of AI are becoming much better at predicting issues, much better at using something like an intelligent clause library to present an appropriate form of contract to their counterparty, and through that, obviously, having very positive impact on the duration and the negotiation.
Absolutely. I think you said it, that if there are clauses that have not worked for you, and you've ended up negotiating on them many times, then it's time to rethink those. Number one. Number two, there could be fallback languages which could work and make things faster, right? And just like you said, Tim, there are so many clauses which are not even required, which are a distraction because of older lingering templates, right? Having those intelligent templates, which would actually say you have an authoring tool, which most of contract lifecycle management systems offer today. That authoring tool would give you a contract that's very relevant to the situation. If it's your own paper, if it's a third party, of course, then you're limited to what's coming in, but you can still get through, hey, this is what is applicable, this is not, and having a platform where you can actually collaborate live, because, I mean, our kids collaborate live on Google Docs. Why are we not collaborating with our counterpart attorneys in a live fashion, right? So technology has so much to offer. It's how we apply it. So this is, I mean, this one's the most painful for me, because usually the root causes are the same, and you really need to be overcome.
Yeah, well, let's go on to the next one, because I think it continues on the theme of negotiation, indeed. The wrong terms and
Correct.
wrong risk.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we know from our biannual nowadays report on the most negotiated terms that we're just stuck on the same old cycle of stuff. Let's have another conversation about limits of liability, indemnities, intellectual property rights. Let's go around the same old circle again and again. But the things that we discovered in the pandemic was that when it came to real governance terms, we need contracts today in such a fast-moving, fast-changing environment. We need contracts that are far more adaptive. So we need to focus much more on how do we better integrate the contract, the governance process, and the relationship, and how do we use contracts much more as a way of framing business relationships. So, for example, much more focus on communications and the communication protocols, the principles of data sharing, of information sharing, communication across the life cycle, the escalation procedures we're going to follow, all of which, of course, can again make use of AI to really streamline a lot of the inevitable problem resolution that's going to need to occur. So we can again use contracts, in fact, to reduce the likelihood of risk occurring, rather than focusing today on worst case scenarios and just trying to essentially use them as asset protection tools. I'm not saying that limits of liability is unimportant, but we actually, and AI tells us, of course, we usually finish up in much the same place every time. So why? Why are we wasting so much time? When we've got that intelligence, when we've got that data, we can really build a business case to start rethinking some of the structure and the terms in our agreements, and really using them as ways to drive more positive outcomes.
Absolutely. I think a lot of the providers out there today, when they come in and sell you a contract lifecycle management product, they would also collaborate with you and come up with the most common term based on your line of business, your use cases. So I think that there is so much intelligence which is there obviously within the organization, but the value add is very consultative too from a lot of these providers. They're not just only giving you products, they're built, most of these products are built by lawyers, for lawyers. So you're going to get a lot more intelligence.
Yeah. And of course, we'd love to hear from you, the audience, on any of these that resonate with you, either in terms of, yes, this is painful, but perhaps more importantly, anybody who's actually managing to deploy systems that are really beginning to help them to overcome some of these frequent issues. So, well, we know then that numbers 4 and 5 are things that really could be streamlined pretty rapidly if people actually want to do so. And we've, in a sense, already preempted, of course, this item 6 with the point that contracts in COVID, by and large, were irrelevant. I mean, people poked around in them and said, well, have we got rights of delay? Have we got rights to change? Have we, as the counterparty, got these rights? What is the escalation procedure? What do we do if we actually want to cancel the order? And the only clause that for many people was potentially relevant was force majeure. So we saw a great flurry of interest in force majeure at the beginning of the pandemic. A few people did exercise it, certainly some industries, quite a lot of force majeure notices flying around. In many cases, people actually drew back and said, now that's actually not what I want. I don't want to cancel the contract. I just want, so they were using force majeure more as a lever to create conversation. But would have been smarter really to have built in those levers before the event, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, hindsight is 2020. Tim. We all know that. But you know what? I mean, at least the pandemic has exposed to us that things can actually be very different tomorrow than they are today, right? And identifying, like the slide says, right? Not just a single contract, but what is the impact of one contract failing on another? How do those contracts relate to each other, right? In your entire supply chain, what is the impact, downstream impact of something not working anymore, right? If you have a single supplier reliance and for whatever reason they're not able to do their bit, you can cancel the contract, yes, but does that help your business? No, right? Your supply chain is still broken. So identifying those interdependencies and those points of failure, that's where AI can help you, that, hey, this is a single point of failure. And companies who have done that in the past too, we all know, have been successful. Companies who have overcome any weaknesses, and especially when it comes to the supply chain, because that impacts your customers directly. So this is again a very critical one, often overlooked, right? Because this is like your car insurance, right? You think you have it, but you don't think about it till you need it, right? But do you have a bare minimum what's required by the state, or do you have a decent car insurance? That's the difference, right? And so I think that's important, because when things go bad, make sure you're in a good spot.
Yeah, I mean, I do love this ability to actually start looking at contracts in a portfolio context rather than just individual transactions. To me, that's one of the most exciting things. I wish I could have done that. Personally, I've always been an advocate of really trying to integrate much more buy-side and sell-side contracting within an organization, because, they are mirror images of each other. They need open data flows, and of course very often the people in sales contract with people in procurement contracting look at each other as the devil incarnate. rather than really building out cooperation, collaboration, and data sharing. But again, AI is giving us this fantastic ability to say, okay, so semiconductors are in short supply. Now, which customer contracts are most affected? Which, quickly being able to do an analysis that says, if I'm having to choose who's going to suffer from the supply shortage, what's going to have the greatest or least impact, which of those customer contracts have got onerous liquidated damages clauses, for example, so that I can begin to apportion my supply accordingly. It's that whole engine gearing up the business to have great and fast visibility to impact and opportunity. What's number 7, Anurag? Can you remember?
Numbers, contracts. Yep, they are difficult to understand. They're not easy, right? And I think it goes back to simplification, right? See what's needed, what works, intelligent templates.
It's our 25%, isn't it? If we've got all those people around the business who need to be able to take information or input information to the contract, we really do need to make it easy for them. And I think few people could accuse the average contract of really being designed for users. Historically, they've very much been designed for the vague possibility that maybe they'll be subject to litigation. So we have a stakeholder, which is the court of law, that is actually the least frequent stakeholder to ever get involved, and we design on that basis. Which isn't really particularly rational, and it is a clear example of where we've got our sort of risk management completely out of kilter. I think.
And if I may add, Tim, extracting the relevant data is so easy nowadays.
Yes.
Even if you have legacy contracts which are poorly written and are very difficult to understand, you don't need to go and break your head with that, right? It's easy to pull out what's really relevant, what's in it, what are your obligations, right? What are the key things? What's the real key metadata that impacts your business and you? That's where simple AI modules, right? Extraction modules can help. Yeah.
So what we're talking about here, of course, is an expansion of use and understanding, because this is now making contracts easier to use and understand by either a physical or a virtual audience, whether it's an intelligent person or an artificially intelligent machine, which does lead us to your point, obviously, about understanding metadata is important. And obviously it is helpful in terms of accuracy, in terms of reliability, if there is consistency of taxonomy. But as you rightly say, we are getting more intelligent in terms of the machines we're deploying all the time. And I mean, one of the challenges for many organizations in this area has been, obviously I can start from a blank sheet, and certainly there are some who deploy technology and say, look, I'm not going to go to the time and expense of trying to go back to all my heritage agreement. Let's build from where we are now. And that's a perfectly feasible way forward, because of course over time you're going to gain tremendous efficiency. Going backwards for many has been somewhat problematical in terms of being able to easily identify the different metadata, largely because, of course, if there's no consistency of contract design, where am I looking? What's it called? Yeah. That has been a stumbling block for a lot of people, hasn't it?
Of course. I mean, a human review of 50-page long contracts, written all different styles. It's such a waste of lawyers' time, right? And it's, again, for a machine to do that is much easier and much faster. Yeah. At a very different scale.
And you're happy now with the accuracy rates that are being achieved, are you?
The accuracy rates, in AI is is north of 90%. No, I mean, it's improving as we speak. But 9 out of 10 times you're going to get what you're looking for, which I think, and I'm an engineer who's never going to say AI is going to be 100%. It is not, right? We those who own self-driving cars know that they work most of the times, right? And that's why we have to have our hands on the steering. And that is how I look at any AI solution, right? Have your hands on the steering. Don't look away, but let it do its job, so that you can do other things too.
And of course, it's important to remember that human intervention is far from perfect. You know, when we look and sometimes talk about the fact that maybe AI has a 95, 96% accuracy rate, people look and say, oh, you know, there's a lot of potential mistakes then, you know, 4 out of 100 are wrong, you know, how much could that cost us? Without, of course, reflecting on the point that I think the analysis suggests that human analysis is only about 92% accurate. At least I know that was a number quoted to me by our colleague Paul Branch while he was still out in the practitioner world and doing this sort of work on his company's contract. So we're probably never going to reach perfection here, but certainly machine learning has reached a point where it is in many cases superior to human intervention.
True, it is, and it's improving, like I said, as we speak. But we're not where we can get our hands off the steering yet. That's where we're headed. But it's still, like you say, human error rate is about 8 to 10% as well. So we're for sure comparable or even better than humans when it comes to AI. Yes.
And Bernardo is asking us, where can I get my hands on this 10 Pitfalls report? Don't worry, Bernardo. While we speak, I suspect it's probably winging its way to you. I know that it's being released to all of our audience today, so you don't have to wait too long to read the full unexpurgated story. In terms of why agreements are so hard to understand, well, I don't know how much of your time you spend reading contracts, whether you take them home for bedtime reading. I mean, they are quite good for putting you to sleep. I mean, I think they're so hard to understand is, as we touched on, that by and large there, you know, I think it was the European Commission working group which came up with a statement that said contracts today are written by lawyers for lawyers in the expectation of litigation. So that's driving the nature of the language that's used. It's also very often driving a structure which is not designed for easy extraction of information. You know, there's even on the legal clauses, there's no uniformity. I mean, where are the indemnities, for example? Is there a specific indemnities clause, or do you have actually indemnities scattered all across the agreement in different clauses? Where do you find the provisions? If I'm sitting in finance and I want to know, okay, which clause of this contract matters to me, I probably have to read the whole thing to get the answer. And if that whole thing is, as it's not so rarely the case, 50, 60, 80, or even several hundred pages long, that is a tremendous use or misuse of time. And of course, I'll probably miss things because I'm not really familiar with the language or what I'm looking for. So, you know, certainly the average business user, which is what we've got as a quote here, just understandably has no time for contracts. We frequently talk to project managers and, you know, they own the contractor's performance and you ask them, well, what does the contract say? And they shrug their shoulders and say, I've never read it. So we know we've got a problem here and it is an overcomable problem. Right, what about pitfall number 8? Huh.
Yeah, in my opinion, a lot of this is because they're thought of as two different tasks. Oh, the contracting task is going to be done by a different team. we'll get involved when the implementation starts. Not true, right? Everything you're going to do in an implementation is carved out in the contracts, and not participating in it from the very beginning or having your opinion embedded in those contracts can be so expensive, right? And we've seen so many failed projects because of this, where the expectations and inferences for the project teams or implementation teams are very different from what's actually in the contracts. I think having a system that notifies the right folks and gets them involved, gets their input on time, in parallel rather than serially waiting for things to happen, can go such a long way. And this is so simple, right? This is automation tools that have been around for a while. No real AI needed here at all, right? It's just workflow, making sure the right stakeholders are getting tagged, providing their input, right? And there are easy automated ways of tagging different parts of the contract to be reviewed by the right stakeholders, rules that can be built in. But it happens. Even today it happens. So.
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of core issues here, aren't there? Whether it's the awarding team or the bid winning team, until it's actually awarded or until there's clear evidence that you're going to be winning the business, pure issues of business efficiency say, I can't really involve loads of people who might be administering this contract if it gets signed. So there are some very natural barriers, and organizations have tried various different ways, maybe bringing people in for the final week or two. But so much knowledge and intelligence is lost in that process, so much of the history of what went on in that negotiation and award. This is where, again, the ability to record, capture, and disseminate that information and keep the implementation team informed or give them easily digestible information is changing dramatically. One of the things, of course, that people have tended to do very often today is to try and create a contract summary that is supposed to address, well, it gives you a sense of the history of what went on, but it also makes the contract understandable, back to number 7. But then we often hear about the fact that it can take anything from 2 to 6 months to create the contract summary to provide the implementation team with the information they need. And of course, in the meantime, they're not just sitting there twiddling their thumbs, they're trying to work on what they think probably was agreed. So this is a really important area where we know businesses typically have got significant problems in this transition. And this is one that you really could jump on very quickly and begin to rectify. Number 9, I think, takes us to the core of what we're talking about, because it's all about contract technology. And still, we've got this struggle, I think, haven't we, Anurag, in terms of the vision that people have. We're still, far too often, I'm talking with members where they're perhaps thinking much too narrowly about particular phases of the contracting process. Let's get the review and approval process sorted. So that they're taking elements of this rather than thinking about the life cycle and creating the sort of vision of what's possible that we're talking about today. Absolutely.
I don't think contracting systems should be thought of systems that work in isolation or solve a single problem. No enterprise product today can work well unless it communicates or integrates into your enterprise ecosystem, if I may say so, right? Your procurement systems, your sales side systems, and if do not go buy any product that does not work well, right? Otherwise you're going to work in a silo. It's not going to do what you need it to do. Do not buy a product that does not solve your use case of an end-to-end, like them says, contract lifecycle management. Most products out there do that today, right? Because you don't want to. The moment you start hitting those roadblocks, you're going to stop using the systems. I think the adoption goes down if you're not getting the end-to-end picture, and it's rightly so, right? I mean, if you're going to have to manage information from different systems on your own, it's not going to increase your efficiency. So I think the goal is go look for products that are solving your use cases, are giving you the end-to-end picture, and also work well in your enterprise ecosystem. I think that is the key, so that you don't have to worry as a user, hey, what happened? Can my sales guys actually just work in Salesforce and still talk to my contract lifecycle management product? Yes, absolutely, right? Can the procurement guys get the visibility they need without having to log into the CLM, because they don't want to leave their system? Rightly so. Why should they, right? You don't want to change their world, but you want to give them the information they need in their systems. And that's where an end-to-end integrated system goes a long, long way. And legal tech has come there now, right? 6-7 years ago, you would have seen more solutions which are point solutions. But now products out there talk well and fit well into the enterprise ecosystem. So it's important to really acknowledge that you don't need to use contract technology in a limited way.
Right. Yeah, for those of you who are straining around trying to work out what is that mini slide on deployment of software tool, we can, of course, send you that. It's also in our recent benchmark report, but if anybody wants it, we'll be very happy to mail it out to you in this form too. What this is telling us is that the real state of deployment is sadly lacking. You can see over on the far left side those sort of big columns, and that's people who have got contract repositories in place. So, yep, lots of contract repositories out there. But then you look at the other areas of functionality, and each of those lines is an area of functionality, and you can just see how quickly the whole thing has dropped off. And the blue line is indicative of the people saying, I wish I did have it. So there's a lot of wishing out there still at the moment, and we'll come in a moment to the people who have deployed at more of a life cycle basis, and we'll give you a sense of what the impact of that has been. But let's first of all move to our final pitfall, and just had a comment in saying pitfalls haven't changed much. I think absolutely that's true. I mean, in terms of where are the major things that go wrong, these continue, you know, the stuff that was going wrong in 2014 is still the stuff that's going wrong today. And so the actual causes of value leakage really have not altered. Some of the factors that are driving it, of course, continue to grow. I mean, the uncertainty we face, the speed and frequency of change today, the pressure that puts on things like requirement analysis, scope, etc. You know, change is coming not just because people negotiated it badly, it's because of changing business conditions and circumstances. But then you get to the point that the contract is not easily usable. It doesn't respond, it doesn't cater for the fact that change is going to occur, it doesn't facilitate it. So these pitfalls all interconnect with each other in various ways. And I think that is the important point to bear in mind, that the contracting life cycle, you know, Stephanie, doesn't in itself alter the contracting life cycle. The steps and stages within it are the steps and stages within it. And what we've highlighted again today is the places where by intervention we can have the greatest impact on raising the quality and the value of that process. And so for post-award processes and governance, well, this is very much a flow through from everything we've talked about up to this point, Henrik.
Yeah. So, you know, it's usually about winning the contract, getting it signed, and people tend to ignore what's going to happen after you win the contract, right? But really, what's important is extracting your obligations, right? What are the key things which need to be done, which are stated in the contract, and actually tying it down to your, for example, procurement system for your supplier performances, right? So are you getting out of your contract what is stated, right? I mean, are your payment terms, etc., are you getting your goods and at the same schedule as it's stated in the contract, right? Quality, everything else. And it's easy to now in today's world to extract that information and metadata from the contracts and as well as tie it to the actual performance. So you get a complete picture of, hey, this is what I signed and this is what I'm getting. And it's very critical. And most of us, right, I mean, different scenarios, but somehow the post-award governance becomes a stepchild, and that's what we want to move away from, right? And we want to make it easy for your business users as well as the legal teams to have that visibility of what happened to the contract after it was signed and active.
Mm. And I suppose part of the big step change on this one is the extent to which we can become more predictive. It's again the ability of AI to be more actively monitoring aspects of performance and looking for warning signs, so anticipating things going wrong rather than always firefighting, being in react mode.
Vendor past performance, how did they do it in the previous contracts? What's their 24-month history like, right? So all of that can easily be, at your fingertips.
So where does all of this get us? So if we go back to our big three questions, as we said, there of course is, we can confidently say that organizations continue to suffer from the pitfalls, that these remain common across many, many businesses, and they are a cause and a source of value erosion. As I mentioned at the beginning, we can certainly, if any of you are interested in insights and what to say, well, this is my business, etc., we've got a set of questions that could probably give you an indication of the likely sort of levels of value erosion that your particular business might be facing. Can you do anything about it? Well, hopefully our story today has demonstrated to you the answer to that is unquestionably yes, you can. And the opportunities that come our way from the deployment of machine learning and artificial intelligence are really powerful in transforming the contracting process. Probably one of the most important points, Anurag, is the extent to which we are able really to look at it as a process now, rather than just a dismembered set of activities that different groups in the business perform on.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the contracting process, one is a collection of a lot of smaller things, but it should be looked at as one entity rather than broken pieces. And like I said before, right, it's not, the contracting process should not be in its own world. It should tie well into other systems in the enterprise. And it does today. A lot of the products out there do. And there's a question, from Ali about, hey, any pitfall related to pandemic realized? I think if anything, pandemic has exposed a lot of, or enhanced a lot of these pitfalls. Like, for example, poor relationship governance, right? How things move from, if you didn't, how your supply chain could break if there's too much dependency on one supplier, for example. So if anything, I think it's exposed it more and more.
So Alex, of course, asks the key question, which we've left the answer to this one until the end. I think hopefully, Alex, we've given Alexander, I'm sorry, maybe Alex, maybe Alexander. Obviously your question is 9.2% still the number. Sadly, in some organizations, the indications are that the number has gone up, that dealing with the consequence of the pandemic, and hopefully that increase is in those cases, in many cases, is temporary. But can you do anything about it? Is what we're talking about today actually having a positive impact? And the answer to that is yes. We have been able to look at a number of organizations that have you know, to be fair, I'm not aware of anybody who has deployed all that we talk about in this report. I mean, we cover a whole array of initiatives, but there are some who have made good progress on that journey. And what we're seeing in those companies, and we have been able to go and do some digging there, is that at the best, at the moment, they're sort of cutting their value erosion by around 40%. So putting that a slightly different way, if you were starting this journey at 9.2%, then you would at this point be down to something like 5.5. So that's a pretty worthwhile return. And of course, it is the beginning of the journey for many people, that there's still more to come.
Couldn't agree more. I think a lot of, like I said, right, the value of an enterprise is in the contracts. And if you can make the case that you can actually save 3 or 4% of your gross value or gross revenue, that is huge.
Seems worth having to me.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you for your comments and questions as we went through. As the slide says, do look out for a copy of the report. We would love to hear from you. I know Anurag would love to hear from you. So if you want any more insights, information, support in trying to perhaps build conversation within your own organization, then we're, of course, always delighted to help you.
Great. Thank you, Tim. Thanks, everyone.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.